The lightsaber is the most recognized weapon in Star Wars and one of the oldest. Its history stretches back tens of thousands of years before the Galactic Empire ever rose, into a time when there was no Jedi Order, no Republic, and no Sith. Before there were lightsabers, there were swords. The legends reference the Jedi path, written from the perspective of the Order's own instructors, traces the earliest Jedi to a planet called Tython, deep in the galaxy's core. The first Force users on Tython called the energy field the Ashla, and over centuries, they learned to channel it through their hands and through their weapons. When the first wars broke out on Tython between the seers who used the Force for healing and the ones who used it for hatred, they did not fight with energy blades. They fought with metal swords, Force forged for strength and sharpness, that acted like extensions of the wielder's body. Those wars are remembered in Jedi history as the Force Wars. They were the first conflicts between the light and the dark, and they were fought with steel. The lightsaber came later, and it came from outside Tython entirely. With technology brought in from off-worlders, the earliest plasma blades came into existence, and from that point forward, they became the symbol of the Order. The metal sword fell out of use. The Jedi, who had spread out from Tython across the galaxy and helped found the Republic, carried the new weapon with them into every era that followed. The construction of a Jedi lightsaber was never a matter of pure engineering. By the time of the Old Republic, the Jedi had refined the lightsaber into a weapon that depended on the Force as much as on its components. The parts themselves were straightforward, including a hand grip, an emitter matrix, a lens assembly, and a power cell with a focusing crystal at the center that did the actual work of producing the blade. The crystal was the part that mattered. Most Padawans built their first saber on the planet Ilum, where the Jedi had access to crystal caves rich in two specific kinds of focusing crystal that produced the bright green and brilliant blue blades the Order is known for. The pilgrimage to Ilum was as much a spiritual exercise as a practical one. Padawans meditated in isolation until the right crystal called to them through the Force, then carried it back and assembled the rest of the saber around it. What made the construction Jedi rather than mechanical was the first step. The pieces of the hilt had to be fused together on a molecular level through precise application of the Force, and the crystal at the center had to be aligned to the user. The consequence of getting that wrong was direct. A misaligned crystal did not produce a working saber. It produced an explosion that took the builder's hand off, or worse. The crystal was the heart of the blade, and without that connection, the weapon did not function. The Sith built their sabers differently. In the Legends reference book of Sith, Darth Sidious explains the difference himself. The Sith of his era did not visit Ilum or any other crystal cave. They forged their crystals artificially in a brood furnace, cooking raw elements through dark side energy until the result was a synthetic stone that produced crimson blades the Order had been associated with for thousands of years. Sidious argues in his own writings that those red blades were stronger than anything the Jedi could produce, and that a properly forged Sith crystal could break a Jedi blade in a direct cross. The Jedi disagreed, and a battlemaster of the same era recorded that synthetic Sith crystals were weaker by nature and more prone to breaking under sustained pressure. That argument stayed unsettled for 1,000 years. The version of the Sith blade that came to define the modern era was a different process entirely, and it appeared in Charles Soule's 2017 run on the Darth Vader comic. In the days following the founding of the Empire, Palpatine takes Vader to the steps of the destroyed Jedi Temple. The Grand Vizier Mas Amedda is conducting a ceremony at ground level, feeding the lightsabers of the slain Jedi into an incinerator and telling the citizens of Coruscant that they will never again have to fear the Order. As the sabers melt, the kyber crystals inside detonate, blasting columns of energy and flame into the sky above the temple. Watching from a balcony, Palpatine asks Vader if he knows why Sith blades are red. Vader does not. The Emperor explains. A Sith kyber crystal, he says, is no different from any other crystal. It has only been made to bleed. The living crystal from any Jedi saber can be converted by the dark side, by pouring pain and agony into it until the crystal turns crimson and the color of the blade becomes the color of rage. Vader asks why he was not given one of the destroyed Jedi sabers to corrupt. Palpatine answers that the saber of a Sith is never given, it is only taken. The mission Vader undertakes immediately afterwards becomes the cleanest example of how a Sith lightsaber is actually made. Sent to find a surviving Jedi Master, Vader hunts a Barashval recluse named Karakin Phila, kills him after a long pursuit, and takes the green-bladed saber and Phila left behind. He carries the weapon to Mustafar, the volcanic world where Obi-Wan defeated him weeks earlier, and dismantles the saber over a stone table inside a dark-side cave. He holds the green crystal in his hands and pours his anger and his hatred into it until the crystal bleeds and the blade ignites red. That moment is what the bleeding process actually looks like. A Sith blade is not built, it is converted through the death of one Jedi and the rage of one Sith, from a weapon of the light into a weapon of the dark. On the battlefield, the lightsaber was an unusual weapon for one specific reason. The blade cuts through bulkheads, it evaporates liquids, it illuminates dark passageways. In combat, a Jedi using the third lightsaber form, Seresu, can stand in the open against 20 blaster-wielding enemies and intercept every bolt. The blade can shape a tunnel of energy that ricochets enemy fire in any direction the user chooses. There is no other handheld weapon in the galaxy that combines that level of personal protection with that level of cutting power. What stops the blade is rare. Rare materials like cortosis, frick, uranium, and Mandalorian Beskar can either short the blade out on contact or withstand its strike entirely. The carapaces of certain creatures, including Talzins and fireworms, will not cut, and the bones of others, including those native to Felucia and Onderon, can be sharpened into blades that can survive a lightsaber stroke. But those materials are exceptions, not the rule. The fundamental fact about a lightsaber on a battlefield is that almost nothing the wielder swings at it will be there afterward. That is the part of the weapon's reputation the galaxy actually remembered. For more than 1,000 generations, the lightsaber meant the Jedi. It meant authority. It meant that the person carrying the weapon belonged to the order that protected the Republic, and that whatever the situation was, a resolution was now within reach. Civilians who had never fired a weapon in their lives knew exactly what the sound of an igniting blade meant. Pirates and slavers and warlords knew it too. That association was so strong that the Sith had to engineer the opposite reaction with their own version of the weapon. A red blade was not just a different color to anyone who saw it. The red blade meant pursuit instead of rescue, and meant that something the law could not stop had arrived instead. By the era of the Clone Wars, the contrast between blue or green and red was the most recognizable visual symbol on any battlefield in the galaxy. Two colors of blade, two opposing orders, one weapon. The same on both sides, used for opposite ends. The end of the Jedi era was where the lightsaber's history turned the darkest. When Order 66 fell and the Jedi Order collapsed, the Empire treated the surviving lightsabers as evidence of treason. Imperial security forces collected the sabers of every dead Jedi they could find, and Mas Amedda's incineration ceremony was the visible part of a larger campaign to destroy the weapons themselves wherever they were found. The kyber crystals exploded when burned, which made the destruction loud, public, and deliberately humiliating to the order they had once represented. Some sabers were preserved instead, in the Imperial vaults beneath Coruscant and in private collections kept by Sith and Inquisitors. Others were buried with the dead in places no one ever found again. A small number ended up in the hands of the surviving Jedi who went into hiding, who carried their own weapons or those of their fallen masters into exile, and tried to keep the tradition alive without drawing attention. What did not happen, and what makes the lightsaber different from almost any other weapon ever invented, is that the technology never died. The Empire could destroy the sabers it found, but it could not destroy the kyber crystals at the heart of every blade. Those crystals were older than the Jedi, older than the Republic, and older than almost anything in the galaxy that still mattered. They could be hidden, buried, melted, or bled, and they would remain what they had always been. The weapon that the first Jedi forged from off-world technology on Tython, all those thousands of years before the Empire existed, was still the weapon every Jedi survivor carried into the dark when the Order fell. The galaxy never fully forgot what an igniting blade meant. But the lightsaber the galaxy came to know didn't appear in its final form. It was rebuilt across 7 distinct levels of technology, each one solving a fatal flaw in the design before it. Before the elegant weapon, before the hum, before the blade, there was only a crystal and a hand. and without control, that crystal was just as dangerous to its wielder as any enemy. Kyber crystals were living stones attuned to the Force. As established in the Canon series The Clone Wars and expanded in E.K. Johnston's Ahsoka novel, they formed deep personal connections with whoever bonded with them. In later centuries, that bond would make the lightsaber an extension of a Jedi's Force presence. But at this earliest stage, none of that elegance existed yet. The crystal was raw, the power was real, and there was nothing between the two except the hands of whoever was brave enough to hold it. Just a stone that hummed the moment the Force touched it. And the beginning was violent. Before any housing or containment existed, drawing power from a kyber crystal required the Force itself. The wielder had to channel their own energy into the crystal and direct the output with nothing but concentration. The result was an unstable, blade-like discharge that sputtered, flared, and surged without any regulation. No containment existed. No control was possible. There was only raw power escaping in every direction at once, and it could burn the user just as easily as an enemy. The image to hold in mind was not a calm green blade. It was a short, violent plume of energy that fought to exist, like trying to hold a flame steady in a storm. One lapse in concentration, and the energy turned inward. Extended use drained the wielder physically and mentally, and anyone who pushed too long risked losing control entirely. When the discharge collapsed, all that stored energy had to go somewhere. The results were devastating. But the raw crystal proved something critical. Kyber could produce a focused discharge when channeled through the Force. The execution was deadly, and no one could fight while maintaining that level of concentration. But the energy was there, buried inside the kyber, waiting to be drawn out. And without some way to control the output, the crystal would take as much as it gave. For this reason, the bare crystal remained a dangerous curiosity, explored by the earliest Force traditions long before those traditions had names. The people of this era were not soldiers. They were scholars and explorers who understood that the kyber held enormous potential, but lacked the tools to unlock it safely. Many of them paid with their hands, their health, or their lives. And yet they kept trying, because what the crystal offered was unlike anything else in the galaxy. A blade made of pure energy, drawn from a living stone, powered by the Force itself. And what they learned through those failures would become the foundation that every future generation built upon. The first real innovation in lightsaber history was not about making the blade stronger. It was about making the blade survivable. Every Jedi who ever drew a lightsaber owed their life to one innovation. And it was not the blade, it was the off switch. The earliest control mechanism was straightforward. A switch or activation circuit that allowed the user to ignite the blade by choice and shut it down at will. This was where primitive housing and crude grips began appearing in the historical record. Not a full hilt, just enough hardware to stop relying on constant Force concentration. Some were a little more than a hollowed grip with a crystal seated inside and a pressure-based trigger to start and stop the flow of energy. But compared to holding a bare crystal and hoping the discharge did not turn inward, these housings were revolutionary. With this, the weapon became something a person could carry and something a warrior could hide. No more live energy leaks out at all times. No more relying on pure Force focus just to prevent the blade from injuring its wielder. The user could ignite when they chose and deactivate just as quickly. For the first time, the discharge was under the wielder's command rather than the other way around. That warrior could walk across a battlefield, choose the moment of engagement, and draw a blade of energy only when it was needed. And that changed combat. Before the switch, the crystal discharge was always active, and there was no element of surprise. Now, the blade could be hidden until the exact moment of the strike. A warrior who carried a switch crystal could choose when to fight and when to walk away. For the first time, a Force user carried a weapon the way a soldier carried a sheathed sword, ready but invisible. The concept of drawing a lightsaber, the act that would become iconic across galactic history, started here. But control did not mean stability. These early housings were not true hilts, and energy was switched, not contained. Some discharges flickered and died mid-swing. Others surged without warning, throwing the blade's length and intensity beyond what anyone expected. Every ignition was a gamble, and every second it stayed active increased the chance that something would go wrong. The user had control over when the blade appeared, but not over what it did once it was there. Warriors of this era adapted by keeping engagements short and decisive, with every strike calculated to end a fight quickly rather than sustain one. The crude switch did not perfect the blade, it made it usable. With the bare crystal and its crude switch proving that a usable energy blade was possible, the Force traditions of the galaxy now faced a harder problem. They needed to enclose this raw power inside something that actually resembled a weapon. The answer would come from the darkest corner of the ancient galaxy. Before we go to level 3, quick shout out to today's sponsor, ExpressVPN. A lot of people don't realize this, but your internet service provider can actually see and log the websites you visit and what you do online. Depending on where you live, that data can be stored for years or even sold to advertisers. And it's not just your ISP. Whoever owns the Wi-Fi you're using can also see your traffic. So even incognito mode doesn't really make you private. That's why I use ExpressVPN. It creates a secure, encrypted tunnel between your device and the internet, which means your online activity stays private and your data is protected, especially on public or unsecured Wi-Fi. It's also great for unblocking content. Streaming libraries are different in every country, and even YouTube restricts certain videos and channels depending on where you live. With ExpressVPN, you can change your online location and access shows, videos, and other content that simply isn't available in your region. It's genuinely easy to use too. You just open the app, tap one button, and you're connected. So if you want to check it out, find out how you can get up to 4 extra months by clicking the link in the description, scanning the QR code on screen, or by going to expressvpn.com/theorder77. Thanks again to ExpressVPN for sponsoring this video. The first real lightsaber in galactic history was powered by the dark side, and the Jedi had no choice but to use it. Long before the Jedi and Sith, as the galaxy came to know them, the Rakata of the Infinite Empire built a weapon called the Force Saber. As depicted in John Ostrander and Jan Duursema's Dawn of the Jedi, Force Storm, issues 1 through 5 for Dark Horse Comics, the Force Saber produced an energy blade housed inside a proper casing. For the first time, the plasma was contained, but it came at a cost that would shape the galaxy for thousands of years. The weapon required the wielder to channel dark side force energy through laboratory-grown crystals to ignite. There was no alternative. The Rakata built all of their technology around dark side energy, and the Force Saber was no exception. Every piece of it, from the crystals to the casing, depended on darkness to function. The Force Saber arrived on Tython through a Rakata warrior named Zesh, whose violent crash landing triggered a devastating force storm across the entire world. The Jedi Order, the ancestors of the Jedi, encountered his weapon and recognized immediately that a contained energy blade was too powerful to ignore. But using it meant drawing on the dark side with every activation, and the Jedi knew that that was a line they could not cross without consequence. Yet the Force Saber's power was undeniable. Zesh's Force Saber broke the blades of the Jedi who confronted him, proving in a single encounter that no ordinary weapon could compete with it. The Jedi who later wielded the Force Saber in combat were forced to tap into the dark side just to ignite it, making it impossible to stay in balance. Each activation pushed the wielder closer to imbalance, and the weapon's existence fed the growing divide within the Jedi Order that would eventually split them into 2 opposing factions, one that became the Jedi, and the other the Sith. But the Jedi were not willing to surrender the concept. At Vertepe, the Forge, one of the 9 Jedi temples on Tython, scholars and weaponsmiths worked to solve the core engineering problem, recreating the Force Saber's casing technology without the dark side requirement. Vertepe was dedicated to metalwork and the construction of arms through the Force. The blacksmiths there understood what they were looking at. The enclosure itself was the breakthrough. not the energy source. A proper casing could turn raw crystal energy into a reliable enclosed system. If the engineering was sound, it could work with any power source. That idea became the foundation for everything that followed. But stripping away the dark side meant stripping away the only proven method of ignition, and no one yet knew how to replace it. They would spend generations rewriting the blueprint the Rakata had written in darkness. The solution would arrive, and it came with a humiliating compromise. The proto-saber freed the lightsaber from the dark side, but it replaced one leash with another, a literal cable that connected the blade to a battery on the wielder's back. As depicted in the Tales of the Jedi comic series, and detailed in Wyndham's Jedi vs. Sith, The Essential Guide to the Force, the proto-saber used a conventional power cell instead of dark side energy. The weapon no longer demanded anything from the user's force alignment. This was a revolutionary achievement, but the power technology of that era could not be miniaturized enough to fit inside the hilt, and the result looked nothing like the weapon the galaxy would come to know. The proto-saber required a cable connected to an external power pack worn on the wielder's belt or back. Jedi and Sith alike carried proto-sabers into battle throughout the conflicts of that era. Approximately 5,000 years before the Battle of Yavin, the weapon looked primitive compared to what would come later. But for the first time in history, a Force user could draw a stable blade of contained plasma energy without calling on the dark side to power it. The tactical disadvantages were severe. The cable restricted range of motion and created a critical vulnerability because the tether itself could be severed or yanked mid-duel, stripping the weapon from the wielder's hands. The power pack could be damaged or targeted in combat, and a single well-placed blaster bolt could disable the entire weapon, and the pack drained fast, with even these larger units providing only temporary energy. A Force user wielding a proto-saber was fighting both their opponent and the clock. Prolonged engagements were not an option. Battles had to be won quickly, or the blade went dark at the worst possible moment. But the proto-saber proved something that no previous level had fully achieved. Despite every limitation, a stable blade can now be wielded with real fighting precision for the first time without compromise. A true combat blade, powered cleanly and used reliably, even if it came with a countdown timer and a critical weakness. Jedi of this era fought with proto-sabers in wars that defined their era. They dueled Sith Lords on ancient battlefields, defended Republic worlds against invasion, and proved that a plasma edge in trained hands could turn the tide of entire conflicts. The Cord forced a different approach to fighting, one that prioritized speed and aggression over endurance. Every exchange carried the weight of a ticking clock, and the warriors who thrived were the ones who learned to strike decisively before their window closed. The proto-saber was flawed, a blade on a leash, but it was functional, and once it worked, the race was on. The entire path of lightsaber development after the proto-saber was driven by a single engineering goal: bring the power supply inside the hilt. Power cells had to shrink, containment technology needed greater efficiency, and crystal alignment had to stabilize enough to maintain a blade without an external energy source feeding it continuously. Whoever solved that problem would create the weapon that would define the galaxy for millennia. And when it finally happened, the lightsaber did not just become a better tool, it became something sacred. This was the weapon the galaxy thought of. One hilt, one blade, no cable, no battery pack, no dark side requirement. Just a Jedi and the extension of their soul. The classic lightsaber integrated the focusing crystal, power cell, emitter, containment field, and activation controls into a single self-contained hilt. As established across the Canon series The Clone Wars and documented in Wallace's The Jedi Path, there was no external power source and no cable. The blade was stable, the ignition was instant, the hum became iconic. The weapon finally offered stability, reliability, and consistency. A Jedi could carry it on their belt, draw it in a fraction of a second, and fight for hours without worrying about power depletion or cable failure. The centuries of compromise were over. The lightsaber had finally become what its builders always envisioned. But the technology was only half the story. In the Jedi tradition, constructing a lightsaber was an essential rite of passage. The canon episode The Gathering from the Clone Wars Season 5 depicted younglings traveling to the frozen world of Ilum to find a kyber crystal that called to them through the Force. The crystal was not selected, it chose the Jedi. Each youngling entered the crystal caves alone and faced a personal trial, confronting their deepest fear or greatest weakness. Only by overcoming that trial could they find the crystal meant for them. The bond between wielder and crystal was not mechanical, it was spiritual, and it began before construction ever started. Under the guidance of the ancient architect droid Huyang, shown in the Clone Wars Season 5 episode A Test of Strength, generations of younglings then assembled their components into a functioning weapon. Huyang had assisted in the construction of lightsabers for 1,000 generations of Jedi and remembered every single one. The droid was a living archive of lightsaber construction, bridging thousands of years of tradition and the youngling sitting in front of him, assembling a hilt for the first time. With this, every lightsaber became unique. When a kyber crystal bonded with a Force user, it changed color to reflect that individual's alignment. In the Legends tradition, Wallace's Jedi Path and Wyndham's Essential Guide described how blue typically appeared in Guardians who focused on combat, green in Consulars devoted to the Force and diplomacy, and yellow in Sentinels who balanced both paths. Because the crystal was chosen through the Force and the hilt was assembled by the wielder's own hands, the finished lightsaber functioned as an extension of the Jedi's identity. But the Sith corrupted this entire process. As E.K. Johnston's canon novel Ahsoka established, the Sith performed a ritual called bleeding. They poured rage, pain, and dark side energy into a captured crystal, forcing it to submit. The kyber resisted. It fought back. Johnston's novel described how the crystal could show visions of other paths, other choices, as if it were pleading with the Sith to stop. But if the darkseid wielder pushed through that resistance, the kyber finally broke. It turned red. Where the Jedi connected with their crystal through harmony, the Sith dominated it through suffering. In Legends, Wallace's Book of Sith documented a parallel approach through synthetic crystal forging and Sith alchemy, confirming that in both canon and Legends, the darkseid's approach to lightsaber construction was built on conquest rather than connection. This distinction between harmony and domination was one of the clearest reflections of the divide between Jedi and Sith in the entire saga. The lightsaber did not become elegant because of engineering alone. It became elegant because the Jedi made building one a sacred act, and that act began with a crystal that called to you. The crystal determined the color, the wielders shaped the hilt, and the Force sealed the bond. This was the level where a lightsaber stopped being merely a weapon and became something that could be trusted with a life, because the person holding it had put everything they had into its creation. With the self-contained lightsaber perfected, the technology itself was solved, but the Force users who carried these weapons were anything but uniform. The focus shifted from making it work to making it work specifically for one person, and the answer changed the weapon forever. Once the baseline lightsaber design was solved, innovation became deeply personal. Force users were no longer asking whether the technology worked. They were asking whether it could be tailored to Dooku, to Yoda, to Maul, and the answers changed everything. The lightsaber was no longer being improved for stability or power. It was being optimized for the wielder. Every modification at this level served a single goal, shaping a perfected engine around the person who carried it. Count Dooku's lightsaber was the definitive example. As shown in Episode 2 Attack of the Clones, and expanded across the Clone Wars, his curved hilt allowed him to thrust, parry, and lunge with greater precision, perfectly matching his mastery of Form 2, Makashi, the dueling-focused lightsaber form. Makashi was built around single-opponent engagements, prioritizing footwork, angles, and economy of motion over raw power. Every curve in that hilt was an extension of Makashi, and every Makashi strike was an extension of Dooku. It was the physical expression of a combat philosophy that Dooku had spent decades refining. Meanwhile, other wielders solved different problems entirely. Yoda Shoto, a shorter bladed lightsaber, was proportioned to match his stature while remaining absolutely effective in combat, as shown across episodes 2 and 3. Despite measuring less than a meter tall, Yoda fought with a ferocity and speed that overwhelmed opponents twice his size, and his weapon reflected that reality. Ahsoka Tano used a Shoto as her secondary weapon during the Clone Wars, giving her an offhand blade for dual-wielding styles that combined the reach of her main blade with the defensive speed of the shorter one. These were not lesser weapons, they were precision instruments designed for wielders who understood that reach was not the only advantage a blade could offer. Darth Maul's double-bladed saber staff was something the galaxy had rarely seen. Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, introduced the weapon, a single elongated hilt with emitters on both ends that produced two blades. It offered superior reach, area control, and intimidation, but required specialized training to avoid self-injury. One hilt, two blades. A single wielder became a perimeter of threat. In the hands of a warrior with the speed and aggression to match, the saber staff could overpower an opponent before they ever found an opening. Maul's fighting style exploited this advantage at every opportunity, using spinning transitions between attacks to create a constant wall of plasma that most opponents could not break through. But modification did not stop at the hilt's shape. Some lightsabers were engineered to transform mid-combat, blurring the line between weapon types entirely. As the Clone Wars depicted through Ventress's paired sabers, weapons that could connect at the pommel created a saber staff setup, giving the wielder reach when joined and flexibility when split. The ability to shift between two single blades and one double-bladed staff in the middle of a duel gave Ventress options that no one could predict. In Legends, Darth Vader's lightsaber possessed dual-phase capability, allowing him to extend his blade length at will. A blade that suddenly lengthened by half a meter could end a fight in a single unexpected stroke. Crossguard variants also appeared in the historical record, with side vents near the emitter that served as both plasma release points and functional guards in blade lock situations. The design was ancient, and it demonstrated that even the earliest lightsaber builders understood that the hilt itself could be a weapon. Every variant at this level told the same story: curved, short, double-bladed, split, and crossguard. They all ran on the same core technology: kyber crystal, containment field, power cell, and emitter. They were customizations, not reinventions. The same engine shaped by different hands for different purposes. At its peak, the Jedi Order numbered in the thousands, and the diversity of saber designs at this level reflected the diversity of the Order itself. No two Jedi fought the same way, and level 6 was the proof. The technology had been perfected, and now it was being personalized. But there was one final level, and at this level, the lightsaber stopped being a lightsaber entirely. It became something else. At this level, the lightsaber became a whip, a polearm, a flat blade of black energy, a speeding disc designed to terrify. These were the weapons the Jedi Order tried to forget. Level 6 was about optimization. Level 7 was about mutation. The core technology was no longer being shaped around the wielder. Every weapon at this level broke the fundamental assumption that a lightsaber had to be a rigid blade emerging from a hilt. The light whip was the most dramatic departure from standard saber design that the galaxy had ever produced. As first depicted in Marvel's Star Wars issue 95 in 1985, Lumia, a Dark Lady of the Sith, wielded a modified hilt that produced a flexible whip-like strand instead of a fixed beam. Her weapon was forged with a grip of Mandalorian iron powered by shards of kyber crystal, and its combat record proved the design was no gimmick. As the following issues showed, Lumia used her light whip to devastating effect against Luke Skywalker on the planet Kinoween, defeating him in their first encounter. Luke only survived the rematch by constructing a Shoto specifically to counter the whip's reach. The light whip terrified opponents not because of its raw power, but because no standard defense could handle a weapon that bent, wrapped, and struck from angles no fixed blade could follow. Meanwhile, one saber stopped being a weapon entirely and became a crown. The Darksaber was created by Tari Vizsla, the first Mandalorian ever accepted into the Jedi Order. First introduced in the Clone Wars episode The Mandalore Plot, The darksaber's full history was later explored across Rebels Season 3. Its profile was shorter than a standard lightsaber, flat rather than round, and it emitted black energy edged with white. It was a throne. Whoever held it ruled Mandalore. It passed through war for generations, claimed by victors and stolen by rivals. As Rebels documented, the blade even responded to the emotional state of the wielder, growing heavier or lighter depending on their focus and resolve. From Pre Vizsla to Maul to Sabine Wren, the darksaber did not simply change hands. It was one, and each one carried the legacy of everyone who had held it before. The Inquisitorius weaponized the lightsaber in ways no one had seen. As depicted in Rebels, these Jedi hunters wielded ring-hilted sabers capable of igniting a second blade and spinning at high speed around the wielder's hand. The rotating mechanism could even generate limited flight capability, as shown in the Rebels Season 2 finale, Twilight of the Apprentice. These were hunters' weapons, designed to overwhelm Jedi survivors through sheer aggression and spectacle. The design carried a critical weakness, however, because damaging the ring mechanism could disable the entire weapon. Other variants pushed even further. The Jedi Temple guards wielded double-bladed yellow lightsaber pikes for perimeter defense, as shown in the Clone Wars Season 5. In Legends, Sith alchemists used the dark side to corrupt the technology at its foundation. They applied ancient rituals to crystals and components thousands of years before the Rule of Two, producing blades with enhanced cutting power and crystals hardened with dark energy that weakened opponents on contact. The dark side did not just power these weapons, it infected them. But across every variant, one truth held. The lightsaber was not just one weapon. It was a core technology that could be shaped into almost any form once its principles were understood. From Lumiya's whip, to the darksaber's flat edge, to the Inquisitor's spinning rings, each one was a different expression of the same idea that began thousands of years earlier with a crystal and the Force. But at the center of every variant, the kyber crystal remained. When the full arc was traced, from a crystal that could kill its wielder to a throne forged from black light, one truth remained. The weapon's journey told a story far larger than engineering. The lightsaber's evolution mirrored the Force traditions themselves, primitive and dangerous at first, then corrupted by the dark side, then refined through discipline and ingenuity, and finally personalized to reflect identity. Blasters were mass-produced, lightsabers were born. And it was the crystal at the core, not the hilt, not the emitter, not the containment field, that made the lightsaber something more than a weapon. Every level, from the raw discharge that preceded the first housing to the darksaber sitting on a Mandalorian throne, was a different answer to the same question. What happened when you gave the Force a blade? Every level produced its own examples, but across the entire saga, only 25 lightsabers stand above all the others. They are ranked by the 4 factors that decide a blade's true power: the kyber crystal, the construction, the legacy it accumulated in battle, and the skill of the Force user holding it.
Ranked in ascending order of power, at 25 is the saber cane, belonging to Jedi Master Tera Sinube. First appearing in the Clone Wars episode Lightsaber Lost, this Kosian Jedi served the Order as an investigator rather than a warrior, and this weapon reflected that specialization. The lightsaber was concealed inside his walking stick, with natural wood branching into a knotted grip while the upper portion hid the emitter. The kyber crystal produced a pale blue blade, standard in composition with no recorded special properties. Furthermore, the construction prioritized concealment over combat optimization, sacrificing grip ergonomics and blade stability for the ability to pass as an ordinary walking stick. In terms of combat record, Sinube's experience was limited to street-level criminals. He subdued the bounty hunter Cassie Cryer and assisted in apprehensions, yet never faced another Force user on screen. The weapon's legacy extends only to inspiring later concealed designs used by Order 66 survivors. As for the wielder factor, Sinube was a capable Jedi Master, though his skills were investigative rather than martial. Assessed across all 4 power factors, this saber cane presents a standard crystal, compromised construction, minimal legacy, and an untested combat wielder. While functional for its intended purpose, these limitations secure its position at the lowest rank. That same necessity for concealment shaped the following entry, which belonged to a Jedi who spent years hiding his true identity. At number 24 is the two-piece lightsaber belonging to Canon Jarrus. Born Caleb Doom, this Padawan survived Order 66 and spent years in hiding while working as a freighter pilot. His lightsaber, featured throughout Rebels, was separated into two components designed to resemble unrelated belt accessories. The blue kyber crystal was standard, claimed during his Padawan training before the Purge. Although the two-piece construction permitted passage through Imperial checkpoints, it created a brief vulnerability during assembly that traditional hilts avoided. Despite these limitations, Kanan's combat record demonstrated genuine achievement. He defeated multiple Inquisitors, including the Grand Inquisitor, held his own against Darth Maul, and survived direct engagement with Darth Vader. The weapon accumulated substantial legacy through the years of Rebellion service, witnessing pivotal moments in the fight against the Empire. As a wielder, Kanan evolved from a traumatized survivor into a true Jedi Knight, eventually sacrificing himself to save his crew. Measured against the four criteria, the standard crystal provided reliable performance but lacked the rare properties or deep attunement that distinguished elite weapons. Meanwhile, the two-piece construction traded combat optimization for concealment, a necessary sacrifice during the Empire's reign, but a limitation nonetheless. The legacy, on the other hand, proved substantial, with victories over Inquisitors and years of Rebellion service adding genuine weight. And while Kanan grew into a true Jedi Knight, his incomplete Padawan training meant that he never reached the heights of truly trained masters. The concealment trade-offs prevent higher ranking. Nevertheless, Kanan proved this weapon could defeat trained dark-side opponents when skill and determination compensated for design compromises. He was not, however, the only rebel who demonstrated creativity in lightsaber construction. Number 23 focuses on Ezra Bridger's lightsaber blaster hybrid, a weapon born from necessity during the dark times following the Jedi Purge. With traditional components nearly impossible to acquire under Imperial rule, young Ezra constructed a weapon incorporating a stun blaster directly into the hilt. The kyber crystal was claimed from a Jedi temple on Lothal, standard in power yet personally attuned through ancient trials. The hybrid construction offered tactical versatility but introduced fundamental compromises. The blaster could not fire while the blade was active, and the scrap part assembly reduced reliability compared to traditionally built weapons. Throughout his training, Ezra fought Inquisitors, Stormtroopers, and engaged Darth Maul directly, surviving encounters that claimed more experienced Jedi. The weapon's legacy ended when Vader destroyed it, forcing Ezra to construct a second, more traditional saber. As wielder, Ezra exhibited raw talent that developed into genuine skill, though he never attained the level of a Jedi Knight before the Rebellion's demands redirected his path. A lightsaber's true power comes from four factors working together: the crystal's attunement to the Force, the quality of its construction, the legacy it has earned in battle, and the skill of whoever wields it. Measured against these factors, the crystal achieved proper attunement through the Lothal Temple trials, but held no exceptional properties. The hybrid construction prioritized versatility over combat optimization, introducing weaknesses that traditional hilts avoided. The legacy was cut short when Vader destroyed the weapon, erasing years of potential battlefield history. And while Ezra showed genuine promise as a wielder, his training remained incomplete when the Rebellion's demands pulled him away from the Jedi path. Innovation born from necessity could not overcome these accumulated limitations. Ultimately, innovation could not overcome the design sacrifices, a limitation that pales compared to the following entry, which features not a single lightsaber, but an entire collection gathered by someone who could never truly wield them. At number 22 is the lightsaber collection carried by General Grievous. The Supreme Commander of the Separatist armies collected lightsabers as trophies from Jedi he personally killed, with his cyborg body capable of splitting into 4 arms to wield multiple blades simultaneously. Each stolen weapon contained a kyber crystal attuned to a fallen Jedi rather than to Grievous himself. This significant disconnection meant the crystals could never amplify his abilities as they had for their original owners. The construction of each weapon was excellent, built by trained Jedi who poured their force connection into these blades. However, Grievous treated them as interchangeable tools rather than extensions of himself. Throughout the Clone Wars, Grievous killed numerous Jedi Knights. Count Dooku trained him in lightsaber combat, teaching forms that exploited his mechanical advantages, spinning blades that deflected blaster fire, four-armed assaults that overwhelmed opponents. Nevertheless, against elite duelists like Obi-Wan Kenobi or Mace Windu, he lost or fled every encounter. Ultimately, Obi-Wan killed him with a blaster rather than in lightsaber combat. The collection's legacy was one of theft and terror rather than earned mastery. Most critically, Grievous possessed no force sensitivity. Without the wielder factor, even the finest crystals in construction proved meaningless. The crystals could not amplify abilities he did not possess. He ranked this high solely because the stolen weapons themselves were expertly crafted by Jedi who understood lightsaber construction at the deepest level. This collection of excellent tools in hands incapable of unlocking their true potential demonstrates precisely why the wielder factor matters more than any other. In contrast, the following entry features a Force user who built multiple blades specifically for his unique physiology. Number 21 belongs to Pong Krell's double-bladed lightsaber set. This Basilisk Jedi Master possessed 4 powerful arms, prompting him to construct a pair of hinged, double-bladed lightsabers specifically designed for his physiology. The kyber crystals produced 1 green and 1 blue blade, both personally attuned during his years of Jedi service. The construction was innovative, featuring hinged hilts that allowed the weapons to fold for carrying and deploy instantly, while the larger-than-standard grips accommodated his massive hands perfectly. During the Clone Wars Umbara arc, Krell demonstrated devastating combat effectiveness against clone troopers, massacring soldiers who could not penetrate his spinning wall of plasma. Yet, his legacy became one of betrayal rather than honor, as he never tested these weapons against Jedi, Sith, or anyone capable of matching his Force abilities. As a wielder, Krell was undeniably powerful, though his fall to darkness tainted everything the weapons represented. Collectively, the crystals were properly attuned through years of Jedi service, and the custom construction was genuinely excellent, optimized for his unique four-armed physiology. However, the legacy was poisoned by treachery rather than built through honorable combat, and the wielder's power was undermined by corruption that severed his connection to the light. 2 factors excelled while 2 factors failed. The betrayal ultimately weighed heavier than craftsmanship. What could have been exceptional weapons became symbols of treachery instead. The ranking continues with another double-bladed weapon, this one forged by a warrior who embraced darkness from the outset. At number 20 is Savage Opress's double-bladed lightsaber. Transformed from a Night Brother warrior into a hulking weapon through Night Sister magic and Sith training, Savage constructed this weapon under Count Dooku's guidance. The red kyber crystals were synthetic, created through dark-side alchemy rather than claimed from natural sources. The construction reflected his brutal fighting style, featuring horn-like emitters and extended grips. However, the rushed assembly under Dooku's demanding timeline prevented the careful craftsmanship that defined truly elite weapons. Savage killed multiple Jedi and fought Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker to a stalemate alongside his brother Maul, a record that justified genuine respect. However, when Darth Sidious arrived on Mandalore, Savage fell almost immediately, impaled by both of the Emperor's blades. The weapon's legacy ended with his death, barely a few years after its creation. As a wielder, Savage possessed raw power, yet lacked the decades of training that separated him from true masters. Taken together, the hastily bled crystals never achieved deep Force attunement. The rush construction sacrificed durability for speed. The legacy ended before it could accumulate any weight, and the wielder's raw power was never refined into true mastery. Each factor fell short of excellence, and strength alone could not compensate for what was missing. This combination placed a hard ceiling on the weapon's power. Departing from traditional lightsabers, the list now turns to weapons that lacked kyber crystals yet proved deadly enough to challenge Force users directly. Number 19 focuses on the plasma weapons wielded by Supreme Leader Snoke's elite Praetorian Guard. Featured in The Last Jedi, these 8 warriors carried weapons in 3 configurations: staffs with plasma tips, whip-like chains that hardened into swords, and paired vibro-axes with plasma edges. It's important to note that these were not true lightsabers. They lacked kyber crystals entirely, drawing power from technological sources rather than Force-attuned stones. While the construction was specifically engineered to counter lightsabers, the absence of crystals meant they could never channel the Force the way true sabers could. The throne room battle proved these weapons could threaten powerful Force users. Rey and Kylo Ren, fighting together, faced all 8 guards at once, and several came dangerously close to killing both. Yet, all 8 guards fell. The weapon's legacy began and ended in that single battle. Moreover, the wielders were elite soldiers but not Force-sensitive, meaning the weapons could never reach their maximum potential. Measured against the 4 factors, the complete absence of kyber crystals meant these weapons had no connection to the Force, eliminating the very foundation that makes lightsabers powerful. The construction was undeniably excellent, specifically engineered to parry and counter true lightsabers in ways most weapons could not. However, the legacy extended no further than a single battle, with no lineage of victories or legendary wielders to add weight over time. Most critically, the wielders themselves lacked Force sensitivity, meaning even perfectly designed weapons could never channel abilities their owners did not possess. These plasma weapons earned their placement by genuinely threatening 2 powerful Force users in combat. Yet, these fundamental limitations created a ceiling that technology alone could not break through. The following entry returns to true lightsabers, featuring a design that pushed innovation into controversy. Right at number 18 is the spinning double-bladed lightsaber wielded by the Grand Inquisitor. Featured in Rebels, this weapon had ring-shaped guards that allowed the double blades to rotate rapidly around the wielder's hand. The red kyber crystals were bled from stolen Jedi weapons, forcibly corrupted through dark-side rituals. This bleeding process created crystals that channeled anger and pain, yet lacked the harmonious attunement of naturally bonded stones. The spinning construction created intimidating attack patterns and even enabled limited flight. However, the ring mechanism was poorly built, leaving it vulnerable to strikes that could disable the entire weapon. Throughout his service, the Grand Inquisitor hunted and killed multiple Order 66 survivors, building a real combat record against Force-sensitive opponents. The weapon's legacy ended when Kanan Jarrus and Ezra Bridger defeated him by exploiting the design's weaknesses. As a wielder, the Grand Inquisitor was a fallen Jedi Temple guard with genuine skill, though his fear of Vader and reliance on the weapon's gimmicks limited his development. Measured against the 4 factors, the forcibly bled crystals carried the pain of their corruption, channeling dark-side energy but never achieving the harmony that comes from a natural bond. The spinning construction prioritized intimidation over durability, creating a fatal weakness that opponents could exploit once they overcame their initial fear. The legacy showed promise with confirmed Jedi kills, but ended abruptly in defeat, cutting short any chance to build lasting weight. And while the wielder possessed genuine Temple Guard training, his fear of failure and over-reliance on mechanical tricks stunted his growth as a duelist. Intimidation can win battles against lesser opponents, but when facing those who refuse to be afraid, the weapon's shallow foundations were exposed. Fittingly, the following weapon was forged by someone who spent years running from Inquisitors before turning to fight. Cal Kestis's modular lightsaber earns the 17th position. Featured in the Jedi Fallen Order and Jedi Survivor games, Cal survived Order 66 as a Padawan, and later built a weapon that could split into dual blades or connect into a double-bladed staff. The kyber crystal was claimed from the ice caves of Ilum. through ancient Jedi trials, properly attuned despite Imperial occupation of that sacred world. The modular construction incorporated components from his master's destroyed weapon, honoring that legacy while enabling tactical flexibility impossible with fixed designs. Cal defeated multiple Inquisitors, including the Second Sister and Ninth Sister, Force users specifically trained to hunt Jedi. Most remarkably, he faced Darth Vader directly and survived, one of the very few Jedi to walk away from such an encounter. The weapon's legacy grew across years of continued service as Cal developed from survivor to leader. As a wielder, Cal's connection to the Force deepened throughout his journey, eventually matching skilled knights in ability. Evaluated against the 4 power factors, the Ilum crystal achieved proper attunement through sacred trials, giving it legitimacy that hastily claimed crystals lacked. The modular construction represented genuine innovation, combining his master's legacy with tactical versatility that outperformed rigid designs. The legacy continued to grow with each Inquisitor defeated, and each year of survival, accumulating weight that weapons with shorter histories couldn't claim. And crucially, Cal proved himself as a wielder by walking away from Darth Vader alive, a feat that placed him among an extraordinarily rare group of Jedi. That single encounter justified this placement, demonstrating what proper attunement, thoughtful construction, growing legacy, and determined skill could achieve together. From a Jedi who barely escaped death, the ranking moves to a dark side warrior who made dealing death her profession. Coming in at number 16 are Asajj Ventress's curved twin lightsabers. Count Dooku's most dangerous assassin wielded twin curved hilt weapons that could connect at the pommel to form a double-bladed staff. The red kyber crystals were gifts from Dooku, bled and corrupted, yet carefully selected for compatibility with her fighting style. The curved construction mirrored Dooku's own preference for Makashi precision, while the connection mechanism allowed rapid switching between dual blade and staff configurations. Throughout the Clone Wars, Ventress fought Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker on multiple occasions, battling 2 of the era's best duelists to draws. She ended numerous Jedi Knights and clone commanders during the conflict. The weapon's legacy continued even after Dooku's betrayal, as Ventress remained dangerous in her new life as a bounty hunter. As a wielder, Ventress combined Night Sister magic with Sith training under one of history's greatest duelists. Weighing all 4 factors, the crystals were carefully selected by a master who understood attunement, giving them stronger compatibility than hastily bled alternatives. The curved construction represented elite craftsmanship, designed specifically for Makashi precision and tactical versatility. The legacy stretched across years of Clone Wars combat and beyond, accumulating weight through kills and draws against the era's finest Jedi. And the wielder herself merged 2 powerful traditions, Night Sister sorcery and Sith blade work, into a deadly combination few could match. Draws against Kenobi and Skywalker meant she fought in their arena as an equal, even if final victory eluded her. Departing from canon, the following entry comes from the Legends continuity. Number 15 takes us into Legends continuity with Tenel Ka's Rancor Tooth lightsaber. Appearing in the Young Jedi Knights novels, Tenel Ka Jo trained at Luke Skywalker's Jedi Academy while carrying the weight of 2 powerful bloodlines. Her mother descended from the Force Witches of Dathomir, while her father claimed Hapan royal heritage. The focusing crystals were Galenorian rainbow gems from a Hapan royal tiara, producing a unique turquoise blade through a combination no other Jedi could replicate. The hilt was carved from her great-grandmother's Rancor Tooth, connecting her to generations of Dathomiri warrior tradition. Tenel Ka's first lightsaber construction ended in tragedy when a flaw caused it to fail during training, costing her an arm. Her rebuilt weapon received far greater care, and she wielded it one-handed with deadly effectiveness. The curved Rancor Tooth hilt proved especially suited for Makashi, the precision dueling form. She fought the Shadow Academy's Dark Jedi and defended the Hoppus Consortium as its eventual Queen Mother. When weighed against the 4 power factors, this weapon excels in ways few others can claim. The Galanorian rainbow gems were irreplaceable royal heirlooms, producing a blade color unique in Jedi history. The rancor tooth construction carried ancestral significance stretching back generations, embedding legacy into the weapon's very materials. Decades of combat defending both the Jedi Order and an entire star cluster added substantial weight to that legacy. And as a wielder, Tenel Ka transformed the loss of her arm into a defining strength, mastering one-handed Makashi with precision that few two-armed duelists could match, a tragedy forged into lasting power. Such resilience was forged through tragedy and refined under the guidance of a master whose own lightsaber ranks just above hers. At number 14 is Count Dooku's curved hilt lightsaber. Secretly Darth Tyrannus, Dooku was trained by Yoda himself before falling to the dark side. The red kyber crystal was personally bled through extended dark side meditation, creating deep attunement to his aggressive dueling philosophy. The curved hilt construction was designed specifically for Makashi Form 2 combat, emphasizing elegant one-on-one dueling. The pistol grip angle allowed superior wrist control and blade manipulation that straight hilts simply could not match. Every element of the weapon's design reflected aristocratic precision, from the elegant emitter to the carefully weighted balance point. Dooku's combat record was formidable. In Attack of the Clones, he defeated Obi-Wan Kenobi decisively, slicing his arm and leg to end the fight quickly. He then fought Anakin Skywalker and won that duel as well, severing Anakin's arm with cold efficiency. Minutes later, he battled Yoda to a standstill before escaping. Throughout the Clone Wars, he killed numerous Jedi and trained some of the era's deadliest fighters, including Grievous, Ventress, and Savage Opress. When lesser Sith or Jedi faced him, they died quickly and without ceremony. The weapon's legacy extended through his students and through Makashi itself, which saw a resurgence across the galaxy because of his victories. As a wielder, Dooku combined 9 decades of experience with both Jedi and Sith training, combining both sides of the Force more completely than most practitioners ever could. Evaluated as a complete weapon, the crystal achieved profound dark side attunement through patient, deliberate bleeding rather than hasty corruption. The curved hilt construction represented perhaps the purest expression of Makashi ever crafted, with every angle and weight distribution calculated for dueling perfection. The legacy carried weight through both direct victories and indirect influence, as his students spread fear across the galaxy, and his preferred form experienced a renaissance. And 9 decades of combined Jedi and Sith training produced a wielder whose technical mastery few could equal. Yet his death at Anakin's hands in Revenge of the Sith demonstrated that even this exceptional combination had limits, that when superior raw power met dark side rage, precision, and experience were not enough. Before his turn to darkness, Dooku passed his knowledge to an apprentice who became one of the most respected Jedi of his generation. Qui-Gon Jinn's lightsaber holds the 13th position. This maverick Jedi Master trusted the living Force over Council directives, and his green-bladed weapon reflected that philosophy. The kyber crystal was attuned through deep meditation on the living Force, creating a connection that emphasized intuition over rigid form. The construction was elegant yet practical, powerful without ostentation, built for a Jedi who valued substance over appearance. Qui-Gon's most significant combat achievement came on Tatooine in The Phantom Menace, where he dueled Darth Maul to a stalemate. This was a Sith assassin trained from birth to destroy Jedi, and Qui-Gon matched him blow for blow. In the Theed power generator, separated from Obi-Wan, Qui-Gon fought Maul alone in confined spaces that negated his preferred Ataru style. He fell, yet his earlier stalemate proved the weapon could match a Sith in fair combat. Weighing each factor, the crystal's attunement to the living Force gave Qui-Gon an instinctive combat awareness that rigid training could not replicate. The construction served its purpose without flash, prioritizing function over form. The legacy, though cut short by his death, continued to ripple forward through Obi-Wan's teachings and eventually reached Luke Skywalker, shaping generations of Jedi. As a wielder, Qui-Gon proved himself skilled enough to stalemate a Sith assassin in open combat. Death does not erase what this weapon accomplished. If anything, its influence only grew stronger after Qui-Gon became one with the Force. And that legacy of mentorship leads directly to the next placement. A warrior who trained under Anakin Skywalker, yet announced through her blade color that she answered to no order. Landing at number 12 are Ahsoka Tano's white lightsabers. After leaving the Jedi Order and surviving the Purge, Ahsoka needed new weapons. As shown in the 2016 Ahsoka novel, she obtained kyber crystals by defeating an Inquisitor called the Sixth Brother, then purified the corrupted red crystals through meditation. This purification process was extraordinarily rare, transforming bled crystals into pure white through sheer force connection. No other character in canon achieved this. The twin blade construction complemented her acrobatic reverse grip style. Ahsoka's combat record with these weapons was exceptional. She defeated the Sixth Brother to obtain them. In the Rebels episode Twilight of the Apprentice, she fought Darth Vader on Malachor and survived, damaging his mask. Later appearances showed her defeating dangerous opponents across decades. The weapon's legacy grew as Ahsoka became a legend in her own right. As a wielder, her force connection was profound enough to purify corrupted crystals, a feat demonstrating extraordinary attunement. Evaluated as a whole, these weapons excel where others fall short. The crystals underwent a transformation no other Force user has replicated, turning Inquisitor corruption into something entirely new. The dual blade construction was purpose-built for her unorthodox fighting style, enhancing rather than limiting her abilities. The legacy continues to grow as Ahsoka's reputation expands across decades of galactic history, and the wielder herself demonstrated a level of Force attunement so profound that she could heal what the dark side had broken. Few weapons on this list can still claim strength across all four factors. These white blades earned that distinction. While Ahsoka walked away from the Jedi Order, the following wielder never did, carrying his blade through decades of service. Number 11 belongs to Obi-Wan Kenobi's final lightsaber. This weapon reflected his complete mastery of Suresu, Form 3 combat, emphasizing absolute defense. The blue kyber crystal was attuned through decades of patient training, creating a connection that prioritized endurance over aggression. The hilt featured gold and amber coloring near the emitter, with deep ridge sections providing a secure grip during extensive defensive sequences. Every design element served Suresu's philosophy: outlast any attacker through perfect defense, then strike at the precise moment of vulnerability. The combat record was extraordinary. Obi-Wan killed General Grievous with this weapon, ending a cyborg who had murdered numerous Jedi Masters and terrorized Republic forces for years. He survived multiple encounters with Darth Maul across decades, repeatedly defeating the Sith assassin who had killed his own master Qui-Gon Jinn. Most significantly, on Mustafar and Revenge of the Sith, Obi-Wan defeated Anakin Skywalker in their legendary duel. This was the Chosen One at the height of his power, consumed by dark-side rage and wielding abilities that should have overwhelmed any opponent. The weapon's legacy extended through 19 years of exile, protecting Luke, eventually inspiring the next generation of Jedi through Luke's training. As a wielder, Obi-Wan refined Suresu to such perfection that he could hold off any attacker indefinitely, waiting for the single mistake that would end the fight. Evaluating the complete picture, the crystal achieved decades-deep attunement through patient meditation rather than raw power. The construction was purpose-built for defensive perfection, with every element serving Suresu's philosophy. The legacy carried the weight of defeating the Chosen One and protecting the galaxy's future hope for nearly 2 decades, and the wielder himself became the definitive Suresu master of his era. That victory on Mustafar, achieved through patient defense against overwhelming aggression, proved what this weapon could accomplish when every factor aligned toward a single purpose, and earned it this spot. Generations later, another Skywalker would build his own lightsaber, though this one was fueled by hatred rather than patience. At number 10 is Kylo Ren's crossguard lightsaber. When Ben Solo fell to the dark side, he bled his kyber crystal through darkside corruption. He poured such hatred into the ritual that the crystal cracked, producing an unstable blade venting excess energy through lateral crossguard emitters. This cracked crystal was both a flaw and a source of raw power, channeling more energy than stable crystals typically could. The medieval crossguard construction was both practical and psychological, intimidating opponents while providing blade lock advantages. Kylo's combat record included destroying Luke's Jedi Academy and defeating trained Force users. He fought Rey to draws, killed the entire Praetorian Guard alongside her, and most devastatingly, killed Han Solo. The weapon's legacy ended when Ben Solo cast it into the ocean upon returning to the light. As a wielder, Kylo possessed Skywalker bloodline potential combined with training from both Luke and Snoke. When evaluated across crystal, construction, legacy, and wielder, a complex picture emerges. The cracked crystal channeled immense raw energy, but at the cost of stability, mirroring its wielder's fractured psyche. The crossguard construction turned a flaw into a feature, venting excess power while intimidating opponents. The legacy carried significant weight through destroyed academies and fallen enemies, yet it ended abruptly when Ben Solo returned to the light. And while Kylo possessed elite potential from Skywalker blood and dual training lineages, his internal conflict prevented him from fully harnessing either the light or the dark. Every element of this weapon reflected the same truth: immense power undermined by instability, potential that was never fully realized. Departing from the sequel era, the ranking now travels back 4,000 years to the warrior who invented a weapon design that terrorized Jedi for generations. Number 9 takes us into Legends with Exar Kun's double-bladed lightsaber. As told in the Tales of the Jedi comics, approximately 4,000 years before the Skywalker saga, Exar Kun fell to the dark side and became one of history's most powerful Sith. His crystals were enhanced through ancient Sith alchemy, techniques lost to later generations. The construction was revolutionary. Kun became the first recorded Force user to wield a double-bladed lightsaber, building from Sith holocron blueprints to create something the Jedi had never faced. Kun's combat record was devastating. He killed numerous Jedi Masters and launched brutal attacks on Jedi strongholds. The Jedi trapped his spirit rather than defeating him in combat. The weapon's legacy extended 4,000 years, as every double-bladed lightsaber afterward echoed his innovation. As a wielder, Kun was powerful enough that his spirit persisted millennia after death. Weighing in each factor, the alchemically enhanced crystals channeled darkside energy through techniques that later Sith could never replicate. The revolutionary double-bladed construction included a weapon design so effective that it terrorized Jedi for generations. The 4,000-year legacy speaks for itself. No other weapon on this list influenced combat for even a fraction of that span. And a wielder whose power allowed his spirit to endure across millennia demonstrated Force mastery beyond what most Sith ever achieved. Innovation that shaped 4,000 years of warfare earned 9th place. 4,000 years later, another Sith brought the double-bladed design to the screen in a moment that changed Star Wars forever. At number 8 is Darth Maul's double-bladed lightsaber. Trained from infancy by Darth Sidious as a living weapon, Maul built his signature weapon under his master's guidance. The synthetic red crystals were created through Sith alchemy, perfectly attuned to his aggressive fighting philosophy. The double-bladed construction allowed simultaneous attacks from both ends, creating offensive pressure that overwhelmed opponents trained in single-blade combat. For audiences in 1999, the moment Maul ignited his second blade in The Phantom Menace remains one of cinema's most visceral reveals. Maul's combat record included killing Qui-Gon Jinn, Engaging two skilled Jedi at once and defeating one proved the double blade's effectiveness. Though Obi-Wan bisected him, Maul survived, rebuilt, and continued wielding double-bladed weapons throughout the Clone Wars. The legacy extended through decades of terror. As a wielder, Maul combined childhood Sith training with relentless hatred that kept him alive when he should have died. Assessing this weapon's total power, the Sith bled crystals achieved deep dark side attunement through years of hatred and violence. The double-bladed construction proved itself definitively when it overwhelmed two Jedi simultaneously and killed a master. The legacy accumulated across decades of terror, from Naboo to Mandalore, each victory adding weight to the weapon's reputation. And the wielder's sheer will to survive, defying death itself after being cut in half, demonstrated a connection to the dark side that few Sith ever achieved. A Jedi Master's death, combined with decades of proven lethality, earned 8th place. Interestingly, Maul would later claim a very different blade with power extending beyond combat entirely. Number 7 belongs to the dark saber. Created over 1,000 years ago by Tarre Vizsla, the first Mandalorian Jedi, this weapon was unlike any other. The kyber crystal responded directly to its wielder's emotional state, a property no other crystal demonstrated so dramatically. Inner turmoil added physical weight to the blade, while inner peace made it swing effortlessly. The flat, sword-like black blade with crackling white energy reflected construction techniques lost to history, producing properties impossible to replicate. The combat record spanned 1,000 years of warriors. Pre-Vizsla fought Obi-Wan Kenobi with it. Maul claimed it by killing Vizsla, then used it against Sidious. Sabine Wren, Bo-Katan, Moff Gideon, and Din Djarin each wielded it, every transition occurring through combat. The legacy was unmatched. Whoever won this blade gained a legitimate claim to rule Mandalore. As for wielders, the darksaber amplified whoever held it, rewarding emotional mastery. The 4 factors show a uniquely force-responsive crystal, irreplaceable construction, a 1,000-year legacy, and wielders across generations whose victories proved its power. From a blade that ruled a civilization, we turn to one that helped save the galaxy. Sitting at 6 is Luke Skywalker's green lightsaber. After losing his father's weapon on Bespin, Luke constructed this blade in Obi-Wan's abandoned hut. The green kyber crystal was attuned through guidance from the Force itself, following fragmentary instructions without formal training. This self-guided construction demonstrated a Force connection strong enough to compensate for the lack of traditional teaching. The hilt incorporated elements from Obi-Wan's weapon while adding modifications suited to Luke's hybrid style. The combat record spoke definitively. Luke faced Darth Vader on the second Death Star and won. When he tapped into anger, he drove Vader back with furious strikes, beating the Dark Lord into submission. Only 2 people ever defeated Vader, Obi-Wan and Luke. The weapon's legacy extended through Luke's years of rebuilding the Jedi. As a wielder, Luke combined Skywalker's potential with training from Yoda and Obi-Wan. Weighing all 4 factors, the kyber crystal possessed a property no other demonstrated so dramatically, responding to emotional state by adding physical weight during inner turmoil and swinging effortlessly during inner peace. However, while Luke was still beginning his journey, our next wielder had already spent 9 centuries mastering the Force. Securing 5 is Yoda's Shoto lightsaber. The greatest Jedi Master spent 900 years attuning his green kyber crystal, creating a bond deeper than perhaps any other in galactic history. That duration of continuous Force connection was unmatched by any other weapon on this list. The Shoto construction was perfectly proportioned for Yoda's small body, shorter than standard lightsabers, but designed to maximize his Ataru fighting style. To compensate for his size, Yoda used the Force to enhance his speed, agility, and leaping ability to extraordinary degrees, turning apparent physical limitations into devastating advantages. Moreover, Yoda's combat record included fighting Count Dooku to a standstill in Attack of the Clones, forcing the Sith Lord to flee rather than continue. In the Senate chamber during Revenge of the Sith, Yoda faced Darth Sidious in a duel that would determine the galaxy's fate. He matched the most powerful Sith in existence, blow for blow, fighting evenly against someone who had killed 3 Jedi Masters in under 5 seconds. No other Jedi in the saga accomplished that. The duel ended only when clashing Force energy threw both combatants apart. The weapon's legacy extended through 9 centuries of training countless Jedi, including Dooku, Obi-Wan, and eventually influencing Luke Skywalker. As a wielder, Yoda's Force mastery was unequaled on the Jedi side of the Force. Assessed as a weapon, this Shoto stands unmatched in nearly every dimension. 9 centuries of continuous crystal attunement forged a bond deeper than any in galactic history. The Shoto's construction channeled that connection into a fighting style no opponent could predict, and the training legacy shaped generations of Jedi who carried this influence across the galaxy. When the greatest Jedi Master who ever lived matched the most powerful Sith in direct combat, the weapon proved it belonged among the very best. 5th place reflects only that the weapons ranked above compiled even more devastating combat records. Yet, while Yoda's blade drew strength from centuries of attunement, the following weapon derived its power from a legacy spanning the saga's most pivotal moments. At 4 is the Skywalker lightsaber. Constructed by Anakin during the Clone Wars, this weapon accumulated more legacy than any other in galactic history. The kyber crystal was attuned by the Chosen One himself, potentially the most powerful Force user ever born. The construction was excellent, built by Anakin at his mechanical genius peak. The legacy is what sets this weapon apart. It witnessed the Republic's fall, the Empire's rise, and the Resistance's triumph across 3 generations. The combat record was staggering. Anakin used it to kill Count Dooku. The same blade cut through the Jedi Temple during Order 66. Luke wielded it against Vader and lost, but Rey used it against the reborn Emperor. Passed from Anakin to Obi-Wan to Luke to Rey, each wielder was elite. Weighing all elements together, the crystal achieved attunement from the Chosen One himself, potentially the strongest Force connection any kyber ever formed. The construction reflected Anakin's mechanical genius, built at the peak of his abilities before his fall. The legacy surpassed every other weapon on this list, spanning 3 generations and witnessing the Republic's collapse, the Empire's reign, and the First Order's defeat. And while no single wielder held it long enough to fully bond with it, each one who carried it ranked among their era's most powerful Force users. The mixed combat record, including Luke's devastating loss on Bespin, prevented higher placement, yet no weapon in galactic history participated in more pivotal moments. The weapon that actually defeated Sidious in direct combat ranked higher still. At 3 is Mace Windu's purple lightsaber. This weapon contained one of the rarest crystals in galactic history. According to legends, the amethyst kyber came from a journey to the planet Hurricane, where Windu healed a shattered native and received a crystal as a gift of gratitude. This origin gave the crystal unique properties that no other weapon could claim, a bond formed through compassion rather than conquest. This electrum-finished construction marked it as a blade for council members of exceptional standing, a visual symbol of Windu's position among the Jedi Order's greatest warriors. Every element of the weapon's design supported Windu's mastery of Vapad, the Form 7 variant that channeled an opponent's dark side energy back against them. Vapad was so dangerous that the Council actively discouraged its study, as practitioners constantly risked falling to the darkness they were drawing upon. Only Windu had perfected the technique without corruption. The more ferociously an opponent attacked, the more powerful Windu became, turning enemy aggression into fuel for his own strikes. The combat record contained a remarkable achievement. Mace Windu disarmed Darth Sidious in direct combat. In the Chancellor's office during Revenge of the Sith, Windu had the Sith Lord at blade point, the only Jedi in the saga to gain such an advantage over Palpatine. However, this single victory must be weighed against the context. The duel's conclusion remains debated, as some fans believe Sidious may have been feigning weakness to manipulate Anakin, and it ended through outside intervention rather than a decisive finish. Moreover, Windu's overall combat record, while impressive, lacks the volume and variety of opponents that define the top two entries. The weapon's legacy carried the weight of that almost victory, a moment that could have saved the galaxy from the Empire's rise. As a wielder, Windu perfected the most dangerous lightsaber form in existence without falling to darkness, a feat of willpower that few others could have accomplished. The four factors reveal a unique, rare crystal with a meaningful origin, construction perfectly optimized for Vaapad, a legacy defined by a pivotal duel, and a wielder of exceptional skill. Third place reflects a weapon that achieved what no other Jedi weapon could against Sidious, while acknowledging that total combat record across all encounters determines the final ranking. The two weapons ranked above this one compiled far more extensive records of destruction against elite opponents. Earning second place is Darth Vader's lightsaber. As shown in the 2017 Darth Vader comic series, after his transformation on Mustafar, Vader hunted Jedi Master Kirak Infila, killed him, and took his kyber crystal. The bleeding ritual lasted days as Vader poured his pain, hatred, and loss into corrupting the stone through pure darkside will. This extended process created one of the most deeply attuned darkside crystals in the saga, a weapon that channeled decades of accumulated rage every time it ignited. The larger-than-standard construction was specifically designed for hands encased in armored gloves, with weight distribution optimized for the crushing gem-so strikes that defined Vader's evolved fighting style. Where Anakin had been acrobatic and aggressive, Vader became methodical and devastating, using mechanical strength to deliver blows that few opponents could withstand. Every element of the weapon's design reflected this transformation from impulsive youth to implacable enforcer. For over 20 years, this red lightsaber was the last thing countless Jedi survivors, rebels, and even Imperial officers ever saw. The Rogue One corridor scene demonstrated Vader at his terrifying peak, cutting through an entire rebel squad while walking slowly forward without a single opponent landing a hit. Only Obi-Wan Kenobi on Mustafar and Luke Skywalker on the second Death Star ever defeated Vader in lightsaber combat. Against everyone else in the galaxy, he was death walking, inevitable and unstoppable. The weapon's legacy was terror itself, suppressing resistance across the galaxy through fear alone. When Vader's lightsaber ignited, people fled or died. As a wielder, Vader combined Chosen One potential with 2 decades of continuous darkside mastery, refining his abilities through constant combat against anyone who dared oppose the Empire. Weighing the complete profile, the crystal endured days of bleeding ritual, forging one of the deepest darkside attunements in the saga. The construction channeled that hatred into crushing gem-so strikes that few opponents survived. The legacy spread across an entire galaxy, with 20 years of terror cementing this weapon as the Empire's ultimate symbol of death. And the wielder was arguably the most dangerous duelist alive for 2 decades, losing only twice against the countless Force users and soldiers who fell before him. Thus, second place was earned through 2 decades of accumulated dominance. Vader answered to only one master, and that master's weapons compiled an even more extensive record of destruction against the galaxy's most powerful Force users. The most powerful lightsabers in galactic history belonged to Darth Sidious, claiming the first place. Constructed during his apprenticeship under Darth Plagueis, these twin weapons represented the absolute pinnacle of lightsaber craft. The red kyber crystals were bled through rituals refined across the entire Sith lineage, techniques passed down through 1,000 years of planning and preparation. The resulting crystals achieved perfect darkside attunement, channeling more Force energy than perhaps any other weapons ever constructed. The construction incorporated the finest materials available anywhere in the galaxy. Frick alloy made the hilts resistant to lightsaber strikes, a defensive advantage almost no other weapon possessed. Aurodium emitters were worth more than most starships, their precision engineering ensuring perfect blade focus. Electrum plating, traditionally reserved for the most distinguished Jedi Masters, announced mastery to anyone who saw these weapons. Every component was selected for excellence and assembled with care that matched Sidious's decades-long patience in destroying the Jedi Order. Sidious concealed these weapons within a statue in his Senate office for decades, waiting through the entire Clone Wars while Jedi Masters like Yoda and Mace Windu walked past without sensing the darkness hidden just feet away. When he finally revealed them in Revenge of the Sith, 3 Jedi Masters, Ajan Kolar, Saesee Tiin, and Kit Fisto, died in under 5 seconds. These were not Padawans or Knights, but council members who had served the Order with distinction for decades. Sidious cut through them faster than they could react. The legacy of these weapons was written in the deaths of Jedi Masters and the terror they inspired. Moreover, as a wielder, Sidious was the culmination of 1,000 years of Sith planning, the most powerful darkside user in galactic history, and the mastermind who destroyed the Jedi Order and ruled the galaxy. Taken together, the 4 factors align perfectly. Sith lineage crystals refined through a millennium of darkside knowledge, premium materials like frick alloy and erodium created construction without compromise. A legacy measured in dead council members established unmatched lethality, and one of the most powerful Force users in history unlocked capabilities no other wielder could access. Indeed, the combined combat achievements of every other weapon on this list cannot match what Sidious accomplished in those few encounters. By every measure, first place is undeniable. In the end, true power required all 4 factors working together. The crystal channeled force energy, the construction shaped combat effectiveness, the legacy proved real-world performance, and the wielder unlocked full potential. That combination separated the legendary from the forgotten, the weapons that changed history to those that merely witnessed it.
Yet for all of those weapons that shaped galactic history, an entire civilization once looked at the lightsaber and refused to carry one. The ancient Sith Empire spent 2,000 years dominating its corner of the galaxy without ever using an energy blade, because something about the weapon went against everything they believed.
The first reason is foundational. Lightsabers violated early Sith philosophy about power and passion. In Legends continuity, specifically the Star Wars Book of Sith by Daniel Wallace, the Sith Code establishes their core belief system. The Code teaches that peace is a lie, and only passion leads to true power. In contrast, the Jedi Code confines its followers through peace, serenity, and harmony, which the Sith saw as the passive acceptance of limitations. Fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate, hatred leads to power, and power leads to victory. Rage channeled through anger is unstoppable, and passion will always defeat peace. For the Sith, the lightsaber represented everything wrong with Jedi philosophy. The weapon embodied restraint and control, the very limitations the Sith rejected. To adopt it would mean accepting Jedi assumptions about power itself. The second reason reveals what Sith weapons actually were, extensions of the wielder's dark side essence created through blood ritual. According to legend sources, a Sith sword is enhanced by submerging it in a trough of blood spilled in anger, with its edge ground using Svoltan rhyolite to ensure it never dulls. The Sith species themselves had practiced this sword forging tradition for millennia before the Dark Jedi ever arrived on Korriban. When the exiled Dark Jedi became Sith Lords, they adopted and refined these existing methods rather than clinging to their Jedi weapons. Sith alchemy worked on both living and non-living matter, though metal was easier for apprentices to work with because there was no living cells to resist the change. According to Sources Sin, one of the first Dark Lords who chronicled these techniques, the process was not quick or simple. Creating a Sith sword required time, rage, and sacrifice. Once altered, any object touched with alchemical science would become force-sensitive itself, forever retaining a mirror imprint of its forger. The weapon carried an echo of the Sith's dark side presence even after death. This meant that wielding a Sith sword was wielding a piece of its creator's power preserved in metal. The blade also focuses the force energy of the user, giving the edge an unnatural sharpness. As the wielder grows stronger in the dark side, the blade becomes more deadly in response. The weapon adapts to its master's growth, which created a bond that went far beyond simple ownership. Warrior and weapon were connected through the Force itself, linked by the blood and rage that forged the blade. Sith swords were not just tools, but literal extensions of their maker's power. A lightsaber, by contrast, could be picked up and used by anyone with the skill to wield it. It carried no imprint of its creator, no bond with its user, and it did not grow stronger as the wielder grew stronger. It was simply a tool, efficient and effective, but ultimately lifeless. For the Sith, this made it inferior, no matter how effective it might be in combat. A weapon without connection was a weapon without meaning. The third reason exposes a philosophical divide. Lightsabers removed the physical reality of violence that the Sith valued. Legend sources preserve a statement from Comac Da, a Sith from this era, that reveals this mindset. For him, although lightsabers are a superior weapon, there is nothing quite as satisfying as feeling the warm spray of blood when one cuts through an enemy with a metal sword. The Sith wanted to experience combat fully, not at a sanitized distance. The lightsaber's energy blade killed without physical contact, without texture, without the feel of steel cutting through flesh. For a tradition built on channeling passion, rage, and anger into power, this distance went against everything they believed. The fourth reason reveals a technological reality. Early lightsabers were deeply flawed weapons during the era when the Sith Empire was founded. The earliest lightsabers were crude devices that used experimental frozen blaster technology to create an energy beam of a fixed length. Designed mainly for siege warfare, these archaic lightsabers were barely portable. Their energy needs required a flexible cable connecting the lightsaber's handle to a power pack worn on a Jedi's belt. The cable was not shielded and literally tied a Jedi to the lightsaber, creating an obvious weakness in personal combat. These weapons, sometimes called proto sabers, were not practical for the kind of fighting the Sith valued. Movement was severely restricted by the tether. The cable itself could be cut by an opponent, instantly disabling the weapon. The power pack strapped to the user's belt became a vulnerable target. An enemy could destroy it, deplete it, or simply force prolonged combat until the energy cell ran dry. For warriors who relied on aggressive, close-quarters combat channeling dark-side rage, these limitations were unacceptable. The timeline makes this even clearer. During the 100-year darkness around 7000 BBY, when the Dark Jedi were defeated and exiled, lightsabers had improved somewhat, but each still required a plug-in power pack attached to the user's belt. This was the state of the technology when those exiles discovered the Sith species and founded the Sith Empire. Their descendants did not use lightsabers during the Great Hyperspace War approximately 2,000 years later, choosing instead to invest in the alchemical weapons they saw as superior to what the Republic possessed. Throughout nearly the entire Golden Age, lightsabers remained technologically inferior to Sith swords. Even when Sith engineers developed internal power cells during the Great Hyperspace War itself, solving the proto-saber's fatal flaws, the Sith forces continued wielding their traditional blades in battle. The weapon they were refusing was no longer technologically inferior, yet they refused it still. This reveals that their choice had always been cultural rather than practical. The fifth reason demonstrates practical superiority. Sith swords were more effective in combat than early lightsabers. The combat advantages were clear. Sith swords are effective against lightsabers because their alchemically altered metal refracts the lightsaber's energy while retaining rigidity and sharpness. A lightsaber cuts through ordinary metal easily, but a Sith sword's alchemical properties allow it to interact with the energy rather than being destroyed. Unlike ancient lightsabers, Sith swords require no power packs or energy cells. This gave them a major advantage in sustained combat. They could deflect blaster bolts just as easily as lightsabers while having no technological weaknesses to exploit. With no cables or power cells, the weapon was always ready at full strength. Darkside wielders could also channel their force power directly into the weapon itself. When calling upon the dark side, they could add that power to the sword's damage, rather than just their accuracy. This increased the blade's killing power in ways impossible with early lightsabers. When wielded by a trained Sith warrior, a Sith sword was often a match for a lightsaber in single combat. The weapon's effectiveness was never in question. The later shift to lightsabers came from different factors entirely. The sixth reason exposes a historical reality. War eventually forced compromise on even deeply held traditions. In the legend source Star Wars: The Essential Atlas by Jason Fry and Daniel Wallace, it documents the Great Hyperspace War in 5000 BBY with specific details about the weapons used. Republic defenders struggled against strange invaders who wielded weapons of alien design. When Sith forces reached Coruscant's legislative district, Jedi defenders stood shoulder to shoulder with lightsabers drawn as a last line of defense. The contrast was clear. Sith wielded traditional weapons while Jedi used lightsabers. The Sith had built an interstellar empire with advanced starships, alchemy, and sophisticated force techniques. Yet, they chose traditional arms because those weapons reflected their values in ways technology could not. Visual records from Star Wars Tales of the Jedi comics by Kevin J. Anderson provide direct confirmation of this weapon choice. In the Golden Age of the Sith, Issue 2, Sith Lords Naga Sadow and Ludo Kresh are shown wielding traditional metal swords during their succession duel around 5000 BBY. These were the two most powerful Sith competing for supremacy after the previous Dark Lord's death. At the highest level of their civilization, during a formal challenge for ultimate power, they wielded traditional Sith swords wreathed in darkside energy. In The Fall of the Sith Empire Issues 3 and 4, battle scenes from the Great Hyperspace War show Sith ground troops and Massassi warriors armed with swords, axes, and polearms fighting against Jedi with blue lightsabers. The visual contrast appears repeatedly throughout the invasion. The first recorded Sith to use a lightsaber was not a traditional Sith at all. The earliest record of a Sith using a lightsaber was Frida Nad, a former Jedi apprentice who learned the ways of the Sith from the spirit of Naga Sadow. This occurred around 4400 BBY, approximately 400 years after Sadow's death during the Great Hyperspace War. The timeline is significant. For over a millennium after their civilization fell, no Sith had adopted the lightsaber. Nad was a fallen Jedi who brought his weapon when he turned to the dark side. When he awakened Sadow's spirit on Yavin 4 and learned Sith sorcery, there is no record of lightsaber instruction. The ancient Dark Lord taught traditional Sith methods even to a student who already knew how to wield a lightsaber. Sadow chose to preserve the old ways rather than adapt to what his student brought. More than 300 years later, Exar Kun modified his own lightsaber into a double-bladed weapon by following instructions from a Sith holocron. The knowledge existed in Sith archives, but was not actively practiced. Lightsaber adoption came from outside Sith culture, imported by Jedi defectors rather than developed from within. The seventh reason reveals persistence. Traditional weapons remained dominant throughout the Sith Empire's existence. Sith swords remained the weapon of choice from the Empire's founding to its fall. This was not a slow transition or gradual acceptance of lightsabers. The ancient Sith maintained their weapon traditions consistently across their entire civilization, only abandoning them when the Empire itself collapsed. The archaeological and historical record shows no period of mixed use, no gradual shift in preference. It was a total commitment to their alchemical blades until the civilization that created them ceased to exist. Even in later eras, after lightsabers had become common among Sith, the old weapon traditions were remembered as more than just relics. They represented a different understanding of what it meant to wield the dark side, a connection to power that later Sith had lost or abandoned. Understanding this choice requires seeing past efficiency. The contrast between these two weapons reveals everything about the ancient Sith worldview. The ancient Sith operated from a worldview their descendants would not share. For them, the weapon's creation through blood ritual was inseparable from its power. Later Sith would adopt different methods, not because they had forgotten, but because they served different purposes in different times. However, for 2,000 years, this weapon tradition held. It defined what it meant to be Sith during the Golden Age, before fallen Jedi brought their lightsabers into the culture. The philosophical conflicts between tradition and adaptation would continue shaping every generation that followed.
Thousands of years later, the philosophy had reversed itself entirely, and the Sith embraced the weapon their ancestors once despised. By the end of the Clone Wars, one specific blade had become the most dangerous lightsaber the Jedi Council had ever produced. Not because it belonged to the enemy, but because it belonged to one of their own. Chapter 1: Doctrinal Deviation. The Order taught that every lightsaber should reflect the three pillars: the Force, knowledge, and self-discipline. The Jedi Path presents construction as a defining step in a student's journey, one involving discipline, meditation, and precise Force alignment. The training manual frames this process as a test of character as much as craftsmanship. The resulting weapon is meant to embody the values that years of study have taught. The emphasis on self-discipline and warnings against passion showed that every component was supposed to serve control, not aggression. When a student builds the instrument correctly, it channels calm focus. When it builds wrong, the saber announces it. And by every measure the Order had, Anakin Skywalker's second saber was built wrong. The man who assembled it was not the same person who had built his first blade. As chronicled in the novelization of Attack of the Clones, his first saber was destroyed on Geonosis, and by the time he needed a replacement, he had already crossed lines the Order never knew about. A forbidden attachment, a slaughter born from grief, a duel with Count Dooku that cost him his arm and nearly his life. The boy who built the first blade had been full of potential. The young man who now needed to build again was haunted by death, marked by violence, and secretly married to a senator. The reference guide describes his second saber as a solidly constructed silver alloy cylinder. Externally, it looked like a well-crafted instrument of the Order. Internally, it told a different story. The saber was specifically set to deliver maximum power. This was not a device designed for careful defenses or measured strikes. It was engineered to overwhelm an opponent through sheer force, to end fights quickly through raw output rather than patient technique. That adjustment was not an accident, it was an engineering preference. The Jedi Path details how the three pillars should be embedded in every component of the construction itself. A properly made instrument channels the Force in harmony with its maker's calm focus. By tuning his new saber for raw output, the builder was telling anyone who paid close attention exactly what he valued: dominance over discipline, strength over patience. The construction process that the Order built as a mirror of inner growth had instead become a mirror of inner damage. The saber did not lie. The governing body simply chose not to read it. The saber was not just a weapon, it was a declaration, and the declaration contradicted the Order's foundation. But a declaration alone can be ignored until the battlefield starts proving it right. Chapter 2: Aggression Rewarded. A weapon designed for overwhelming output is a concern. A weapon built for peak output in the hands of someone who fights like the Chosen One is something else entirely. The Lightsaber collection records that even as a Padawan, Skywalker's fighting style revealed his darker impulses. His entire approach was based on aggression rather than defense. Instead of purely defensive posture the Order encouraged, he relied on aggressive thrusts and big, powerful swings. Every exchange was meant to put his opponent on the back foot, to dominate rather than deflect. Where other knights sought to control the pace of a fight through patience, the Chosen One sought to end it through pressure. The novel makes clear why this mattered to the governing body. The manual covers the different combat forms available to students. In each one, from the basic movements taught to initiates to the advanced techniques studied by knights and masters, was built on a foundation of discipline and emotional control. A weapon is supposed to be an extension of the Force itself, guided by calm awareness rather than raw emotion. The philosophy behind every stance and every movement was rooted in the idea that a true guardian fights to protect, not destroy. Skywalker was not just fighting aggressively, he was winning aggressively. His movements were driven by feeling, by intensity, by a desire to overpower whoever stood across from him. Where the established forms taught students to read an opponent and respond with the minimum necessary strength, he attacked with the maximum power available. The saber, tuned for overwhelming output, was the perfect match for a fighter who swung with maximum force. The tool and the technique reinforced each other in a cycle that grew stronger with every engagement, creating a combat approach that looked less like the Order's traditions and more like something from the opposite side of the Force. And the battlefield kept rewarding it. The Chosen One was effective, his mission succeeded, the enemies he faced fell. Every successful engagement made it harder for the Order's leadership to argue that his approach was wrong, because the results said otherwise. The tradition had spent centuries teaching that self-control leads to victory, yet he was proving one fight at a time that overwhelming power worked just as well. That contradiction was not just uncomfortable, it was corrosive. If anger wins as reliably as discipline, then the entire philosophical foundation of combat training comes into question. A flawed technique can be corrected. A technique that keeps winning rewrites the rules. And the Council had no answer for a doctrine being disproven on the battlefield, especially when the weapon doing the disproving was built to be unmatched. Chapter 3: Uncontainable Power. An unpredictable student is manageable. The senior masters had dealt with troubled individuals before. The Order's history was full of those who had brushed the shadow side and been guided back through discipline and mentorship. An unstable student with elite level ability is not. Stunt coordinator Nick Gillard, who designed the fight choreography for the prequel films, rated Skywalker's skill at a level 9. As noted in the reference guide, this placed him on the exact same tier as Master Yoda and Mace Windu, two of the most powerful duelists the Order had ever produced. Yoda's command of the Force and of combat technique was the product of centuries of experience. Windu had developed his own technique form specifically to channel the pull of darkness without giving into it, a technique so difficult that he was the only practitioner who had ever mastered it fully. Skywalker stood beside them as one of the absolute best the Order had. That meant the aggressive fighter the governing body was watching could not be outmatched in a duel, cannot be physically corrected, and cannot be stopped by force if the situation ever demanded it. The senior masters could see the aggression in his technique. They could sense the emotional turbulence behind his strikes, but they also knew that in pure combat ability, he was their equal. The Order had produced exactly what its system was designed to produce, a warrior of extraordinary ability, and then watched as that warrior developed in a direction the system had no mechanism to control. The Order's entire structure assumed that the strongest members were also the most disciplined. Every layer of the system, from initiate training through the trials to the rank of master, was designed to ensure that skill and self-control grew together. When they did not, the system had no backup plan. There was no protocol for a knight who can match the greatest living duelist, but who swung with the emotional wildness of someone the tradition had failed to contain. The governing body could watch and worry, but they could not physically step in if the moment ever came when watching and worrying were no longer enough. The Order had trained a warrior it cannot physically control, and a threat that cannot be contained does not stay individual for long. Not when the Order's own training system gives it a path to spread. Chapter 4: Corruption Spreads. If the aggressive combat style had stayed with one knight, the Order's leadership might have treated it as an individual failing, something to monitor closely, but not to truly fear. A single flawed practitioner, even a gifted one, could be watched and kept away from the most sensitive assignments. Instead, the aggression reproduced. In the same reference guide, the development of Ahsoka Tano is directly tied to her master's influence. When the young Togruta Padawan began using two blades, adding a shorter second blade known as a shoto, the choice was not simply tactical. The lightsaber collection explains that the addition of this second blade was intended to show that her master's aggressive tactics were shaping her growth as a warrior. She was learning to fight the way he fought, forward, fast, and overwhelming. The shoto gave her a secondary offensive option that matched his preference for constant pressure. Where the Order's training was supposed to teach patience and self-discipline, she was absorbing a completely different set of values from her master on the battlefield every single day. The connection went deeper than technique. The same source reveals that Ahsoka's original sabers featured an upper portion that was a mirrored version of her teacher's own design. She was carrying a physical echo of his identity in her hands every time she ignited her blades. The tools she assembled were shaped deliberately in his image, the direct result of a training bond that transmitted the master's philosophy into the student's construction. The Jedi Path describes the bond between a teacher and a Padawan as one of the most important relationships in the entire tradition. The manual outlines how a student progresses from initiate through the trials and eventually to the rank of knight, guided at every stage by the example and wisdom of their assigned master. The entire system was designed to pass down core values across generations. Self-control, selflessness, and devotion to the Force were meant to flow naturally from teacher to student, ensuring that each new generation upheld the same principles as the one before. Instead, what flowed from Skywalker to Ahsoka was something the system was never built to handle: his aggression, his preference for offense over defense, his emotional intensity in combat. All of it passed through the training bond and took root in a promising young student. The saber tuned for overwhelming pressure had become the template for a second pair of blades. The governing body was no longer watching one unstable knight with troubling techniques. They were watching that instability reproduce itself in the next generation through the exact channels the Order had built for passing down wisdom. A single unstable knight is a risk, a philosophy passed to the next generation is a structural threat, and the Council knew the difference because everything they feared was about to be proven right. Chapter 5: Fear Proven Right. Everything the governing body feared about this weapon, this fighter, and this path materialized when the Republic fell. The novelization of Revenge of the Sith provides a devastating account of Skywalker's final turn. The fall did not happen all at once. It built steadily through manipulation, fear, and the slow collapse of every relationship he depended on. His attachment to Padme, the one secret the Order never fully uncovered, became the lever that pulled him over the edge. Every crack that had been forming since Tatooine, since Geonosis, since every mission where his aggression went unchecked, was exploited by the Dark Order until there was nothing left to hold. During his first hours as a Sith Lord, Skywalker still carried the same blue-bladed saber he had built during the Clone Wars. He had not yet constructed a red-bladed replacement. He had not yet fully become Darth Vader in name or appearance. He was operating in the space between identities of a fallen knight carrying the tool of his former life. As recorded in the novel, the fallen knight used that alloy cylinder, the one constructed for maximum power, to end younglings inside the temple itself. Children who had been training to become guardians of peace, who had been studying the same pillars and the same forms outlined in the training manuals, were struck down as clone troops simultaneously swept through the halls. They were students, some of them years away from even beginning their trials, and the blade that killed their defenders had been built by a man who had once been one of them, who had once walked those same temple halls as a boy with nothing but hope and raw talent. Order 66 was happening across the galaxy at the same moment. Thousands of Guardians who had served the Republic for years were cut down by the troops they had led into battle. The institution the young knight had served his entire life crumbled around him as he became the very thing those institutions had always warned against. The weapon built for dominance had turned against the institution that built the man who held it. After his defeat on Mustafar, Obi-Wan picked up the fallen saber and carried it away from the volcanic shore. The blue-bladed instrument that had once belonged to one of the Order's most gifted members was lost to its maker forever. The bond between builder and weapon was broken. But even in separation, its influence was not finished. The reference guide reveals that when the newly christened Darth Vader eventually designed a replacement, the result maintained clear design similarities to his old work. The raised hand grip edges and the solid metallic alloy construction carried directly into the Dark Lord's new blade. Even across the boundary between light and dark, between Jedi and Sith, the influence of that familiar cylinder persisted. The Council did not misread the danger, they misjudged their willingness to act. Obi-Wan carried that blade into exile on Tatooine, keeping it hidden for nearly 2 decades in the sands of a desert world, far from the galaxy's attention. When he finally handed it to a young farm boy named Luke, the saber began an entirely new chapter, one that the Order's fallen masters never lived to see. The blade Obi-Wan carried into exile had been built by the man who would become Darth Vader. The full story of his fall, every moment that brought him to that blade, is next.